Marianne, it's such an honor to welcome you to the Soul Collective. Thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me. Great to talk to you.
Yeah, it's an honor to connect with you. You've personally impacted my life as well as millions of people around the planet. And, I feel this is going to be such an expansive conversation. Where I really want to start is, this is a spiritual podcast, and often in conversations with spiritual topics, there can be a tendency to focus on, the love and light. And I want to ask you, where do you feel we're maybe missing when we shy away from sort of the complicated and messy topics, such as politics, for example, when we solely focus on love and light?
Well, my colleague, the late Debbie Ford, a wonderful woman who died several years ago, wrote a book that got a lot of attention at the time, The Dark Side of the Light Chasers. And she was the one who really introduced into the conversation the idea of the spiritual bypass. But I think when you refer to things like politics, for instance, that's a collective spiritual bypass. Right now, because I'm particularly interested in, and my career has been so focused on the actual spiritual themes at the heart of all the great religious systems, it's important to recognize that you can't jump over the crucifixion and go right to the resurrection. You can't forget that the Israelites were imprisoned in Egypt and go right to the idea of a journey to the promised land. If you jump over the crucifixion and go directly to the resurrection, you're not in transcendence, you're in denial.
Hmm.
So that's what a spiritual bypass is, whether it's about our collective issues or individual issues. It's kind of like a doctor saying, let's say you go to the oncologist, and it would be the equivalent of the oncologist saying, well, that's kind of a funky, it's cancer and stuff. That's not fun. Let's talk about your elbows instead. Let's talk about your fingers instead. Or even worse, the oncologist saying, well, let's not focus on it because what you focus on expands. If you don't focus on that stage 1 cancer, it's more probable that it will become a stage 3 cancer. So yeah, it's an issue. I think that it's an issue, however, that more and more people are awakening to, simply because the situation on the planet today, the situation in our own democracy today, it's very hard to be in denial. And it's very hard to be respected by the people around you if you continue to be in denial about that. The age of the ditzy woman is over. The age of the ditzy anyone is over, but particularly when that ditziness and disconnectedness, quite convenient disconnectedness, by the way, is masquerading behind spiritual principle that in fact itself is being misused. So I think that, and I've been saying this for many years. I've been the person within the transformational and higher consciousness community, always pointing out that that the higher consciousness, the seeker, whatever we call ourselves, we should be the last people, I've argued, who should be sitting out the great social, political, and economic questions of our day. Because if you have a clue what changes one heart, then you're the one who has a clue what would help change the world. So in a way, we've been withholding our gift, our main gift, which is metaphysical understanding. And metaphysical understanding really is the understanding of the deeper psychological dynamics um, that prevail within, whether it's an individual life or a collective. One more thing I will say about that I think was important for our whole community was because there was a deeper reason why so many did that, and that's capitalism itself. Once it became a business,
Hmm.
because when my career began, this career niche didn't even exist. There were like 5 of us talking about these kinds of things. So you didn't even have the thought, well, this could be a career. For the first 2 years of my lecturing, I was a temporary secretary in Los Angeles. So I didn't even, there wasn't anything to be ambitious for. And I believe that that was really a blessing on me at that time. And I also found myself embroiled in the AIDS crisis because of so many people coming to my lectures. I never was lured into that, and then Oprah Winfrey gave me the gift of taking my book. But what I saw the community do is go into a place where It was its own bubble. So yes, it was easy to just talk about love and light within that bubble. But it's also interesting because it meant a complete surrender of the gravitas,
Mm,
the political, economic, and social gravitas that we had earned. Not only had we earned it in terms of the conversation that many of us were having, but also had earned in terms of a corner of the society which did have financial leverage if we chose to use it. When you've sold as many millions of books as are sold in this field, that means you do have leverage if you choose to use it.
mm,
And I would point out that the Jews, the Catholics, the Muslims, the Protestants, they're out there starting soup kitchens, starting universities, starting universal hospitals. I would say, what are we doing? We're starting conferences. Come on, guys. It's time to grow up. You know, you get to a point of power in the society. And of course, the status quo in this country was very happy to leave us in our own bubble because they wouldn't have really wanted to hear what any of us would have to say, as I certainly came to experience. Because the status quo doesn't mind conferences, doesn't mind bestsellers, doesn't mind podcasts, as long as you're not coming for power.
mm.
So that's the answer to your question.
You've called politics a collective assignment. And, I want to ask you about that because we're so interwoven with corporate capture right now in our country. And how do we begin to extradite ourselves from that power matrix? And then also, I really want to ask you about, as we evolve spiritually, collectively, do you feel that we're going to have, changes on, how do you see that playing out in our political process?
Well, first of all, I just want to tell you, in terms of the span of my career, uh, how much gratification and delight it gives me that a young woman who is interviewing me on a spiritual podcast asks me about corporate capture. That right there means we're moving forward. So I was delighted to hear you say that. I learned in this, my last presidential campaign, that the problem is in fact worse than I even knew. It's not just our federal agencies that have been captured by corporate interests. It's not just our larger political system, as in having turned Congress, for instance, into a system of legalized bribery because of the undue influence of corporate money. It's also, which I certainly knew before this campaign, but something we really need to address, there's been a corporate capture of the Supreme Court. And what I learned in this campaign is the extent to which there's been a corporate capture of the political parties.
Mm.
Now, when you say, how do you begin to extradite ourselves? Only by people waking up. It is the only way. These people wouldn't work so hard at their propaganda if they were not, in fact, afraid of us waking up. And their propaganda is a form of disinformation. So if any candidate, for instance, comes along and is speaking a deeper political truth, but particularly from a spiritual basis, that could be a that could be a real threat if enough people were around that. So they use the internet, they use hit pieces, they use shaming, they use de-amplification of candidacies and campaigns, they use outright lying, they use false narratives, they pervert truth. It's very serious stuff. But there's only one thing that that can override that and will override that and would override that. And that is if enough people disengage from this codependent relationship with the political media industrial complex, particularly, I have to say, particularly Democrats. And I say that with great sadness. I've been a Democrat all my life, but the codependent relationship that so many Democrats have formed with the DNC, no, we're not going to, no, we don't primary the sitting president. Well, I'm old enough to remember Eugene McCarthy primarying Lyndon Johnson. She's a spoiler. Well, she can't be a spoiler because it's a primary. People need to do a lot more than, well, I'm just going to vote for whoever the Democrat is. Now, I'm not in any way letting the Republicans off the hook. The Republicans suppress votes. They pick out who they want to vote. The Democrats suppress candidates. And it's both a form of voter suppression. It's both both are a part of the corporate capture of the political parties, which George Washington had warned us about. But once again, if the American people are awake, and I think we're all learning how much more vulnerable we even like to think we are to algorithms, to stories. I mean, there was one woman, she put up a video recently with the most outrageous lies about me, to the point where I had, anyway, that it was outrageous lies about me being a cult leader. And I got on there and I said, these are lies. And one woman wrote, "Why would she lie?" Well, what, are you new to the internet? I mean, once you are in any kind of public position in this country, you realize the level of false narratives that are spun, the lack of ethics, not just in political parties, but also in mainstream media. And it's very, very frightening when you see it for what it is. They decide on their narrative, and they've got their story, and they'll have Sunny Hostin on The View or Joy Behar on The View or whatever shows, whatever, sometimes with these young journalists, I wonder, did you not take ethics classes? And for me, what I experienced was just complete erasure and invisibilization. If they don't want you around, they will say whatever they need to say in order to make people feel, well, I wouldn't listen to her, or I wouldn't listen to him. I mean, obviously, because he's a joke. Or they'll just use words like credible. She's not credible. Who says? Or she's not qualified. But their idea of qualified is to perpetuate the machinery as it's already running, which, as you made clear, is at the behest of corporate interests, because the political parties have become another corporate interest. Now, what do we as what do we do? Well, having just tried to do something and been and failed at that, the question then for me as a citizen and as a spiritual seeker is, where do you go with that? Well, from a spiritual perspective, the first thing you need to do is heal your own heart from the quite shattering experience that is to be trashed in front of the world. Your entire career that you felt had dignity made to appear like it was silliness or whatever. That's the first thing. And then you have to stand back and realize what's going on here that's most important is not you, but the state of your country and the state of the world. And you always have to return to, how can I best serve? Now, I think for the spiritual community, it's also important for some people to remember and for some people to know, among white people, the abolitionist movement, because there was the abolitionist movement among Black people, I mean, it was obviously a very segregated time. Among white people, the abolitionist movement emerged from early evangelical churches in New Hampshire. And many of the leaders of the women's suffragist movement in the United States were religious Quakers. And Dr. King was a Baptist preacher. So the majority of the great social movements in the history of the United States emerged from spiritual and religious sources. Because there are characterological aspects which are rooted in spirituality, which enable us to both endure chaotic times and be leaders in transforming them. Where each of us fits in at any particular moment in this larger effort, it should be like everything else in our lives, according to our own individual guidance. When Mahatma Gandhi was asked who is the leader of the Indian independence movement, he said, the small, still voice within.
Yeah. I want to ask you, you've shared a little bit about sort of an old world crumbling and a new world being birthed. Where do you feel we're at that journey?
Both, both, midway both. They are simultaneous phenomena. Crucifixion, resurrection. One world is crumbling. Not only that, it's the Yeats poem, "The Center Cannot Hold." Democracy itself has turned out to be far more fragile than we might have thought. American democracy is. Rise of autocracy around the world. Income inequality, so much unnecessary suffering in this country and around the world. Increased climate catastrophes. And once again, the perversion of truth itself, so that people don't even know what to believe. These are signs of a culture in decline. Now, this goes back to what we were saying before about the characterological aspects of being a responsible person at this moment. If you want to allow, not even if you want to, but if you choose consciously or subconsciously to allow what I just described to just make you spiral down, anger, nihilism, cynicism, which is just an excuse for not helping, frustration, depression, anxiety, you want to go into that sort of black hole of it's all fucked and we're all going to die. Okay. But then there's another choice. And the other choice is to go, these are rough times. There have been rough times in this country before. There have been rough times on this planet before. The stakes are actually higher than they've ever been because global catastrophe could be a consequence of unwise and unsustainable behavior at this point. And we're not going to be able to rise to this occasion. We're not going to be able to be the transformers if we don't all grow up really fast. So you cry in the morning. I always say, pray in the morning, kick ass in the afternoon. Enough time overemphasizing our wounds, enough time overemphasizing our pain, enough time overemphasizing our trauma, all of which are there. However, you become wise at experiencing and navigating the dark night of the soul in your own life so that you can become a navigator of the dark night of the soul in the collective. I personally felt as a candidate for president that what is necessary is leaders who are willing to compassionately help America look in the mirror. Because we have to, as a nation, we have to do the same thing we have to do as individuals. You're going to have to be honest with yourself and others and your own mistakes, and to atone for your own mistakes and make things right and make amends and all of that. The doomsday clock is now closer to midnight than it's been at any time since 1947. However, it's not midnight yet. But we will not make it through this if women continue to act like girls ever, and men continue to act like boys. This is our rite of passage. And by that, I think that there's too much emphasis on the difference between generations. I think that has its place. But at this point, whether you're 18 or 80, you're up. You know what I mean? This generation of Americans means anybody of voting age, anybody of activism age. And I believe in what's possible. And I say that as having been at the effect of the worst corruption that I've just described to you. But once again, simultaneously, a new world being born. I was so up close and personal because traveling around the country as much as I was, I can tell you the American people are not the problem. People are good. People are decent in this country. I'm not saying we're better than anyone else, because we're not, but we're not worse either. People are ready and willing to be called to something noble, but the system does not call people to nobility. And That's what's going to have to change. But once again, it won't change until the American people begin to wake up, and it's got to be on the level of the primaries.
Yeah.
Particularly because, when the political party is recruiting people to run for Congress and recruiting people to run for Senate, you know what their first question is? Can you self-fund? Which means, do you have $1 million lying around that you can afford to lose? And that, of course, is because of Citizens United and the undue influence of money that is permitted in our political campaigns.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And I think that's a huge issue about how, I mean, if we could just take all of that money, or a huge percentage of the money that's spent just on political campaigning, and put it into, you know, causes, we'd be in a totally different place. But
also, it's not just how we spend the money, it's that the people who are donating that money, what they want for it. And that is the perpetuation of a system in which their profits continue to supersede the health, and safety and well-being of people and animals and planets. Now, ultimately, what we're going to need, and I think this will be a younger generation, I don't know if I'll be around to see this, but what this country needs is a constitutional amendment that will establish public funding for federal campaigns. That's the ultimate fix here. And that's going to take a lot of work to make it happen, but I hope a younger generation will make that happen.
yeah, and how problematic do you feel a two-party system is?
Well, if we had a parliamentary system, I think clearly more voices could be in the mix. That's not going to happen. We have what we have. But George Washington did warn us in his farewell address about political parties. He said he feared that they would form factions of men who were more loyal to their parties than to their country. And then John Adams, the second president, said he saw them also as the greatest threat to democracy. There was a time in my lifetime where more than not, it was never perfect, but you did have a sense that some high-minded conservative values were represented by the Republican Party, or at least enough people within the Republican Party. And high-minded liberal values were articulated and promulgated within the Democratic Party, or at least enough. So that when Eisenhower said the American mind at its best is both liberal and conservative, there was enough yin and yang, there was enough functional government that, okay. And also in our history, the abolition came from the Abolitionist Party. It did not come from a major political party. Women's suffrage came from the Women's Party. It did not emerge from a major political party. Civil rights movement emerged from the National Christian Leadership Conference. It did not emerge from a major political party. What's happened today, however, is that these outside voices not only have political parties, the third party's been just suppressed and nullified and undermined constantly. And anybody who can't see this now, hello, they not only suppress candidates within the Democratic Party, then if the candidate says, okay, I'm going to vote the Green Party or independent, they try to suppress you there, kicking people off ballots and so on. It's just terrible. But in addition to that, the voices of people, let's say something like the Black Lives Matter movement. The Black Lives Matter movement was numerically the largest protest movement in the history of the United States. And it did not lead to one legislative change. So at this point, you could say, we're going to have 200, Martin Luther King had 250,000 people in front of the Lincoln Memorial. And Congress itself and the White House said, okay, 250,000 people, we got to act. Today, they go, something's going on over at the Lincoln Memorial today. Maybe it's going to be inconveniencing for me when I'm driving home. They don't care. That's how locked up the system has become. So there's either going to be, John F. Kennedy said, those who make peaceful revolution impossible make violent revolution inevitable. And also I'm reminded of a line in the Course in Miracles where it says, It's not up to you what you learn. It's merely up to you whether you learn through joy or through pain. This system is going to implode. This system, this cannot continue like this. We have option A or option B. Option A, that we are responsible, that we are wise, that we are nonviolent, that we are committed, that we are dedicated, that we are serious, and we're loving. But it just is, this shit's got to stop. Option B is it's going to happen in ways that none of us would wish to see. I don't know what that would look like, but I think there would be a point where people will just have had enough. And, we're seeing already how so many of the pillars of our democracy are they're crumbling, they're frayed. And within the political parties, the lack of ethical dedication. When I was younger, even 20 years ago, the role of of any major political party was to step back and let the voters decide who the candidate would be. Today, they're unabashed about it. They think they have the right to decide, and then they have their media partners, and that's that corporate capture.
Yeah. Marianne, as you're talking, I'm seeing sort of the metaphor of birth being illuminated. I just actually went through the birthing process 3 months ago. And when you're in labor, it's the most intense right before, the actual birth of this, person, sort of human, emerges into this world. And that's what I feel as you're talking. We are going through this intensity collectively, but also so many of the spiritual teachings that you have, taught about, have, brought forth are so relevant at this time. And I want to talk to you about your newest book, The Mystic Jesus Mind of Love. And really, it seems obvious, but why now? Why are the teachings of Jesus so important at this time?
Well, first of all, congratulations on giving birth 3 months ago. Was this your first baby?
It is, yeah.
What'd you have?
A boy. His
Oh,
name is
well,
Phoenix.
congratulations. Congratulations. That's so beautiful. And yes, I agree with you. There's that Arundhati Roy line, a new world that is struggling to be born. And I agree with you. That new world, like I said, when I was with people, I see there is a collective yearning. And this collective yearning for a better world is accompanied by a realization that we have to rethink this world. Repent, for the kingdom of God is at hand. Repenser, rethink. And people are rethinking everything. We're rethinking politics. We're rethinking economics. We're rethinking education. We're rethinking healing and medicine. We're rethinking everything. And one of the things we're rethinking is religious and spiritual truth, right? So part of that rethinking and part of that more expansive, enlightened view of everything is realizing that the great religious stories are code. And the external aspect of the life of Moses, the life of Jesus, the life of Buddha, etc. Now, with Jesus, we actually know he was a historical character. With Moses, some people believe it's a composite. Some believe it was one person. Buddha was a historical character. But the point is that beneath the level of the historical reality lie untold layers and dynamics that speak to the human experience in ways that are acutely relevant today. So when Jesus said, for instance, my kingdom is not of this world, well, there was no conversation yet about the quote unquote inner life. Sigmund Freud had not been born. That would be another 2,000 years. My kingdom is not of this world means it's of the psyche. It's that there are perceptual differences between focusing on the world that is falling apart and focusing on the world that needs to be born. Now, as you and I were saying at the beginning, you have to look at it, but you don't have to dwell on it. The problems. Look at it got it, and go directly into what do we have to do to give birth to the new world. And so Jesus is an example. Now, I've written in my book, Tears to Triumph, I wrote about Buddha, I wrote about Moses. I'm not saying, there's nothing in my book, The Mystic Jesus, which says, this is not the traditional Christian religion. I'm not speaking as a Christian. I'm not speaking as a Christian scholar. That's not my field. As a student of the Course in Miracles, however, I'm a student of universal spiritual themes, whether they be in the Christ story or any other. Now, the very fact that so many billions of people on the planet are either Christian or, and this is what's interesting in terms of what's happening in our culture, the biggest quote unquote religious denomination is called the unchurched. People who have rejected, for often very good reasons, the doctrine, the dogma, the institutional religious strictures, but they don't want to throw away God with, the baby with the bathwater. They didn't mean to be rejecting God, and are feeling starved for the deeper spiritual nuggets. And that's what I hope this book contributes to. This book is talking about the mystical aspects. So there is the historic aspect, the life of Jesus, and much has been written about that, and it can be very profound and meaningful for billions of people, obviously. There is also, however, an expansion of the realizations of what the Christ mind means, what the Holy Spirit means, what Jesus himself means, what crucifixion means, what resurrection means psychologically, emotionally, in our daily lives, in practical ways that burst some things open that might not have been open before. Jesus, in a way, is like when you go to a museum and there's glass cases and they're musty, and he's like stuck in there. And people want to just open up. Let's open up the windows and open up the doors and take a new look. It's the individuation. Remember, this is a new millennia, for goodness sake. It's not just a new century, it's a new millennia. And so it's just like when you grow up and you go to therapy and you look at the life that your parents lived and what they taught you. And you go, what worked and what didn't? Because what worked, I want to stand on their shoulders. And what didn't work, we're going to cut that cord right now. I'm not going to give that to my kids. And I think that's where we all are. And so this book is about the deeper psychological and emotional also dynamics involved, not only in the life of Jesus, but in our lives. That's what's important. The mystic Jesus is not someone who lived 2,000 years ago. The mystic Jesus is he who lives today as a universal spiritual and non-exclusive spiritual force within anyone who relates to him.
I love that so much. What was the role of Jesus in the Course of Miracles?
Well, he is the author, but the Course in Miracles doesn't put his name on the front. Not everybody buys that. No, the book's not trying to get you to believe that. It's not trying to get us to believe in anything. It's not trying to get us to believe in Jesus. It's not trying to get us to believe in God. It's trying to get us to believe in one another. And it says belief is meaningless, experience is everything. So some people might be uncomfortable with that idea. It's referred to enough in the book, but if you don't want to go there, that's fine too. And he says in the Course in Miracles, you can be a student of this material, and it's been referred to as a self-study program of spiritual psychotherapy. So you can do this course, you could become an advanced student of this course and certainly find greater inner peace, which is the goal of the course. But he says, if you personally give your burdens to me, there's just a little more I can do. And that's really what this book is about, that little more he can do. When the trigger and the wounding is so great that you want to be loving and you want to forgive and you need to, but boy, your own triggers, your own wounds are so intense that you need a little extra help getting over the hump. You might know intellectually, I'm going to have to forgive. I can't, if I go forward with my grievances, I'll become bitter. I'll just perpetuate the suffering. You can know that intellectually, but getting there viscerally is so hard.
Yeah.
The role of Jesus, if you say, I am willing, And I give to you my honest feelings about this because I actually think this is the biggest jerk in the world. And I know you think he's an innocent child of God, but I'd be lying to you if I didn't tell you such a son of a bitch. And I know I have to forgive him, but it seems to me if I just forgive him, I'm condoning it. That can't possibly be fair. But I know if I take these grievances with me, then I'll become a pathetic person. You're just kind of like, I can't do this. Jesus is a guide who says, well, what the Course in Miracles says is that his having achieved the complete actualization of the divine mind. Now, he says in the Course, I don't have anything you don't have. The difference between us is I don't have anything else. I'm in a state which is only potential in you. He is an evolutionary elder brother. He has achieved that state of full actualization of the divine consciousness. And so we're told in the Course in Miracles, it's as though he has been authorized by God. Should we say, I need a little help here? He says, my mind joined with your mind can shine away the ego. And I can give you new life here because I can help you dissolve those painful memories. I can help you dissolve them through a level of unconditional love and forgiveness that maybe you feel is going to be a little too hard for you to handle by yourself.
So good. Yeah. I wanted to ask you about ego. And I feel, your book and bringing forth the teachings of Jesus, forgiveness, compassion, non-judgment, all these things are so helpful when we really truly are able to embody those teachings. And I feel, the path of devotion, the path of practice is just that. It's a practice daily. And I want to ask you, just from your perspective, ego can really, you use it in the way the ancient Greeks used the term of, the small separate self. And I really want to ask you about really breaking down those barriers. How do we begin to dissolve ego from your perspective?
Well, first of all, as you said, it's in Course in Miracles terms, it's just the belief that we're a small separate self. I think a great image that the Course uses is where it says, you are like a sunbeam to the sun, thinking you are separate from other sunbeams. You are like a wave to the ocean, thinking you are separate from other waves. So if a wave says, I'm just one wave in the ocean, now look at the psychological difference between thinking I'm a wave in the ocean separate from the other waves versus I'm a wave in the ocean, but there's really no place where I stop and the others start. Okay. If I think I'm a wave in the ocean separate from all the other waves, how can I not live in constant terror that I will be overwhelmed in any moment by a wave that's bigger than me, that I will drown within the ocean itself, that I will be obliterated? That's ego, a false belief I'm separate from this ocean. The other way of looking at it is, hey, I'm one with the whole ocean. No place where I stop, it starts, I move, it moves, I move, I'm safe here. It's a completely different psychological orientation. So the Course in Miracles says enlightenment is a shift in self-perception from body identification to spirit identification. Body identification, which is, it's all about me, my body, my resume, my mistakes, what I did right, what I did wrong, only the life of my physical self, nothing about before I was here, nothing about after I was here, other people's opinion of me, the fact that I don't have enough. I mean, all that's what the ego mind is. It's the constellation of neurotic and pathological thoughts that emerge from the belief that we're separate. And that's all it is a false belief. So what the Course in Miracles, and really the Course doesn't have any monopoly on truth, because in a way, this is what any serious spiritual tradition does. It dismantles the thought system based on fear and separation. And then in the second half of year, and I'm talking about the workbook now, in the second half of the year, we are substituting a thought system based on love for the previous one, which was based on fear. But it's like going to the gym, you got to work out those attitudinal muscles just like you work out your physical muscles. And it doesn't happen immediately. And I'm not saying this is someone who's gotten there 24/7, but the falling off the spiritual wagon becomes the exception rather than the rule.
Mm.
Because the Course in Miracles says every moment you're making a decision. You're either making the decision consciously or you are making it subconsciously, whether to live with your heart open or your heart closed. Are you here in a situation to be of service, to be gracious, to make the other person feel better about themselves so that they too can rise? Do you realize that you have no separate interest, that the only way you can really have the positive experience in this situation is if you help somebody else have the positive experience in the situation? Because if you do that, which is counter to the dominant thinking of the world. He says in the Course, my way is not difficult, but it's very different. Everything I just said is common sense. Everything I just said is like, duh, but start doing it. It's like, well, this is different. What we are more prone to do, because we are trained to do it by the thinking of the world, is to go into situations. What can I get from this? With how to use other people, at least subconsciously, or exploit people for our purposes. What and an instinctive temptation to judge, to find fault with others, to defend, to blame. And once again, it's two parallel universes. Depending on how we choose to show up in a situation, we will have one experience or the other. That will not be determined by what other people do nearly so much as it will be determined by how we choose to perceive the situation and who we choose to be within it, regardless of what other people do.
And in the Course and in your teachings as well, you share that miracles are an everyday natural occurrence when we are in the state of love and being open-hearted. Can you share a little bit more about that?
Well, the Course in Miracles says miracles are natural. When they do not occur, something has gone wrong. It also says miracles are everyone's right. Purification is necessary first. So, first of all, what is a miracle? Miracle is when loving thought gives rise to the next loving thought, giving rise to the next loving thought, giving rise to the next loving thought. Once you realize that the entire world as we experience it is a projection of our thoughts, that thought is the level of cause and the human experience is the level of effect, you realize that loving thought is the generator of the life of harmony, a life that works, a life of peace, right? And the miracle is that shift. The miracle may or may not mean some dramatic change on the outside. The real miracle is the dramatic but often subtle changes on the inside. You had an aha, right? I had a situation not long ago. I left a lunch and I realized that the woman had seemed kind of cold and kind of unavailable for friendship going forward. And I said to myself, well, I guess she hasn't forgiven me for that kind of rough patch we had a few years ago. And then it occurred to me, did you ever apologize? Did you ever ask her forgiveness? Like, wow, because it would have made a big difference. Do you know, it's these realizations, so many of the things that go wrong in our own lives are of our own making.
Mm.
Sometimes people say, I've never had the opportunity to do this. I've never had the opportunity to do that. And I would say, is that really true? Or did you blow the opportunities that came?
Mm.
I know in my life, on both a personal and a professional level, there has been way more me blowing opportunities than opportunities never arising. The mind of God, the universe is, you think of it as the handwriting of God. It's just an opportunity creating machine, right? But once again, everyone's right, but purification is necessary first. The Course in Miracles says miracles occur naturally as expressions of love. But it also says in the intro, it says the Course does not aim at teaching the meaning of love. It aims at removing the barriers to the awareness of love's presence. Every thought we think, every single thought we think, either leads to a greater opening of peace and possibility, or a deflection of peace and possibility. And that's simply law, cause and effect. Cause and effect holds on the external planes, and cause and effect holds on the internal planes as well.
What does purification look like from a practical perspective?
Okay, you came out of a situation, and once again, the Course aims to remove the barriers to the awareness of love's presence. When Jesus says, I'm in a state that is only potential in you, I don't have anything you don't have, I just don't have anything else. It means you get rid of the anything else. He doesn't go into a situation and even have the capacity to see someone without love. If someone is unloving to him, he interprets it as a call for love. You and I have been trained by this world into an unnatural way of seeing and thinking. Okay. So the purification is the process by which these things are brought up for conscious review. You walk into a situation and you leave and you think, wow, nobody wanted to play with me. Nobody wanted to have work with me. Nobody wanted to have a date with me, whatever it is. And then you think, well, how did I come across? Was I giving and gracious, and did I ask about them, or did I only talk about myself? Did I really come in there with an energy that would make anyone want to have further communication with me? Or was I whiny? Was I not my best? Was I, gossiping about someone? It's these things you go, oh my goodness. There was so much on top of my love that who I really am was eclipsed. That was on me. Right. And I tell the story in the book that I think I'd written about before, that I once read about Michelangelo. That Michelangelo said that the way he created a great sculpture was that he would go into the quarry and there was this huge piece of marble. And in Michelangelo's mind, God had already created the statue, the Pietà, whatever. And he saw his job as getting rid of the excess marble. The purification process is that process of looking in the mirror. Oh, the Course says only what you are not giving can be lacking in any situation. Sometimes the purification process is your own grief, your own pain. But even then, it has to involve some looking in the mirror, forgiveness of yourself and others. It's the process by which we drop habits of thought and behavior which hide our love and deflect the miracles that would otherwise be ours.
I want to ask you a little bit about your personal journey.
Okay.
I read somewhere that your father took you to Vietnam, and I wonder what the impact of that was on your life.
Well, I was in the 7th grade and I came home and we were at dinner and I started explaining to my parents what we called at that time the domino theory. My social studies teacher had told us that if we didn't fight in Vietnam, that we would be fighting on the shores of Hawaii because the communists were going to take over all of Southeast Asia and we had to stop them in Vietnam. And while I was explaining this to my parents, I saw my mother going, like, oh, Lord. And I noticed that my father's face was getting paler and paler. And then he stood up. He said, that's it. Those bastards are not going to eat my children's brain. That goddamn military industrial complex is not going to eat my children's brain. Sweetheart, he said to my mother, get the visas. We're going to Vietnam. My mother, oh, Sam, but she did it. So, and that was so typical of my family, my growing up. So being there, I remember my father explaining to us, because it was 1965. So the war was raging outside, like 5 miles outside of Saigon, but you could still be in Saigon. And I remember my father showing us bullet holes. And my father explaining to my brother and my sister and me that there will always be those who try to argue for war, but we better be damn sure that we ourselves think it's a good idea. My father fought in World War II. We had an American flag out in our front yard. My father was a very patriotic American, but he saw militarism. That doesn't mean you lack respect for the military. Militarism is a different thing. It's where you look to the military to solve problems that do not represent righteous foreign policy, but might represent, instead of that, profit making for defense contractors and so forth. And I think all of the travels that we did at that time, it was not only Vietnam, it was also countries behind the Iron Curtain, Russia, Hungary, Finland. This was before the Soviet Union was broken up. Especially as a child, I saw that people are the same everywhere. And I think my brother and my sister and I were made by those experiences invulnerable to certain levels of propaganda, or at least certainly less vulnerable to certain levels of propaganda, particularly militaristic propaganda, than other people that we knew.
Your life has been such a dedication and so much courageous service. I'm curious from your perspective, how can we best serve? Is it the internal work, the purification, or is it, stepping into politics? Is it, what is the best way that we can each make a difference?
Well, first of all, you were very generous and kind to say my life has been a life of dedication and service. The way I look at my life, yeah, it's been some of that. It's also been too much wasted time too. I could have done more. And so don't get any idea that, this stuff's hard. This stuff's a lot easier said than done. So I appreciate your acknowledging where I got it right. But I have certainly experienced and do experience the myriad ways that the world tempts us to be about something other than our Father's business. So I don't think it serves any of us to have these ideas that there are other people who had some eureka and got it right all the time. And also I found in my life, if that image or narrative is even created about you, makes you more of a target for those who want to shoot you down. What we do now, what I do now, what you do now. Obviously, I have a very strong feeling, by the way, about you. If you have a child under the age of 5, you're absolved. We'll hold a space for you. Nothing is more important than early childhood. Nothing. So if the baby's napping and you can do your podcast from home, great. Other than that, so that's how I feel with that. Yeah. And I think for all of us, whether we are the mother or the father of a tiny one or not, I think it means putting the children first. In terms of the specific behavior, whether it's trying to save the environment, climate mitigation, animal rights, storing up our democracy, foreign policy, peace building, healthcare coverage, whatever the field is, I think we are all guided from within. Where can we be most useful as an artist, as a healer, as an educator, as a scientist, as a business person? As Joseph Campbell said, follow your bliss, because your bliss is your dharma. Where you can be of greatest service really is where you will find the greatest joy. And that's one of the lies of the ego. Do I serve God or do I be happy? To serve God means to serve love. Unless you serve love, you can't feel love. It is the key to happiness. But God doesn't give me instructions for someone else's life, and God's not giving someone else instructions for my life. But I think the more we live, particularly whatever your meditation practice, whatever your prayer practice, your mindfulness practice, particularly in the mornings, it's like physical exercise or the 12 steps. If you do it, it works. But there is so much to distract us today from the deeper work that needs to be done. And I think that the more we, not only within ourselves, but also talking to other people, enough with the constant asking, are you okay today? Are you okay? I know you're very wounded. Are you okay today? Ask maybe that in some situations, that question could be asked a little bit less, and we could ask a lot more. What incredible, amazing thing are you doing right now? And how can I help? The cells of the body are led through a kind of natural intelligence to collaborate with other cells to serve the healthy functioning of the organ or the organism. So are we. And when a cell in the body disconnects from that collaborative function, that's called cancer. And what's happened to the human race is we've been infected by malignant consciousness, i.e., it's all about me, which is that state of separation. So I think as we awaken, and I do think there's a profound awakening going on right now, the very fact we're having this podcast, think about this. There are literally millions of people around the world at this moment having conversations similar to this one. Different places, different languages, different contexts, different spiritual, religious, secular, but articulating that yearning that humans feel right now. We can do better. And at this point, we must evolve into a better version of ourselves. Oh, God, that scared me. Or we could literally go extinct. Our democracy could implode. The human race could, as the Secretary General of the United Nations said recently, we're on an unsustainable path. So it's a time of awakening. And I think that brings us sort of full circle to what you said before. The full awakening cannot be, it cannot only not be denying the darkness, but this is how the Course in Miracles puts it. Yes, this world is a dream, but you don't get to go from the dream to an awakening. You have to turn it into a happy dream first. So when there's no war and there's no unnecessary suffering and the planet is completely cleansed and people are happy, it'll still be the level of form, not the ultimate spiritual quantum reality, but it'll be a happy dream. And we can't get out of here until we've done that one first.
It's beautifully expressed. Marianne, it's such an honor to connect with you. I so deeply enjoyed your book, The Mystic Jesus, Mind of Love. You are just such an incredible human being. I just want to thank you for your service.
Well, thank you. And good luck to you. Congratulations to you and to your partner for this magnificent magic moment you're in your own life and to your little baby.
Thank you so much. People can go and get your books anywhere, but I also noticed on your website that you have a group that is to really study and deep dive into the Course in Miracles.
Well, what I have is I'm doing now an online course on my first book called A Return to Love. And the subtitle there is Reflections on the Principles of A Course in Miracles. So it's kind of like what we used to have the Cliff Notes, explaining the basic principles of the course. And then after that one, I will be doing an online course on the Mystic Jesus. So there are all kinds of ways that people can go to Marianne.com and learn more if they're interested.
Beautiful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.